So why focus on supply chains? Why have a whole class all semester focused on supply chains? First of all, supply chains are cool, but they're also important. So why? If we think about supply chains and then all the things that support supply chains, material handling, logistics, they are really the backbone of our economy. So if you think about acquiring goods and services, every company has a way to do that. They need to fulfill those customer requests, and therefore supply chains are the backbone of the US economy. I think that was really evident when COVID happened. When the supply chain broke, we in our daily lives felt that. And a really, really good example of why supply chains are important is the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. These are just recent examples of supply chain being difficult and extremely critical for the health and well-being of our citizens. And to get our economy back going, we need the supply chain to work. And so this is a really illustrative example. But even post-pandemic, the supply chain is a huge part of our economy. In the US, it's about 8.5% of the GDP, which is associated with over $1 trillion. And it's also a huge employer. It's the second largest employment sector in the US. And so, this is a big part of our world. But it's also a really critical part of our world. As I mentioned before, I think, you and I living through when the supply chains weren't operating are a good example of why supply chains are important. And so oftentimes supply chains are things that just work in the background and we just take them for granted, but they're complex, important, critical problems that someone needs to design, someone needs to analyze, someone needs to manage. And so in this class, we will talk about that. And I would say even before COVID-19, I think it's a really exciting time to think about supply chains. And I would make the case that supply chain design was at an inflection point. And to illustrate what I mean by that, let me take you through a few questions. So think about the last time you bought something online. How long ago was that? Was it in the last day, last week, last month, last year? Likely you all have purchased something online relatively recently. Now I'd like you to think about, what is that product? Did you buy a book? Did you buy food? Did you buy electronics, etc., right? The assortment of things that we are now able to purchase online and get quickly is pretty immense. And here's a question for you. How long were you willing to wait when you ordered something online to when that product showed up? Were you willing to wait 2 weeks? If you're like me, the answer is no. But I want to remind you, it wasn't that long ago that 10 business days was the standard time from when you placed an order to when you could expect to get that. That is now ludicrous. No one wants to wait 10 days, but that is a huge supply chain challenge. We want our stuff fast, within a couple days, and thinking about going from that customer request to all the things that need to happen to make that request arrive to you is a supply chain challenge. And where did you get your product delivered? Likely it was delivered to your house. And so if you think about everyone watching this video, those are each individual locations where they got delivered. That's also different. In the past, you would get things delivered to a store and there'd be fewer of those locations. And then finally, how much were you willing to pay for that delivery? Recent surveys say not much. So we want all of these things, but we don't want to pay too much for it. And so if you answered the question that you've purchased something online, want it fast and cheaply, you have then personally contributed to a fundamental change in how supply chains need to respond to fill customer requests. And so kind of more succinctly, today's customers, that's you and I, we expect a wide variety of requests to be fulfilled quickly with little warning. By the way, I want it in 2 days, and I'm not going to tell you a week in advance to make that delivery. I just want it now, kind of on demand. In small units. The one thing I didn't mention is you're not buying a pallet of books, right? You're probably buying a single book. And therefore, the way we handle the supply chain needs to change. To many dispersed locations, to all of our houses, our dorm rooms, and at low cost. This is really a tall order to meet. It's a challenge that companies are doing, but it's something I think people are in the midst of, and we need innovation to think about these are the demands that are happening. How can we then design supply chains, processes, systems, ways of fulfilling requests to do this in an efficient and effective and equitable way? And so my kind of hypothesis is that today's customers, that's you and I, are fundamentally different than yesterday's customers that used to go to a store. And so if we think about how to fulfill customer requests behind you, right, we have to think differently. And I would make the case that a lot of supply chains and specifically distribution systems are optimized for yesterday's customers, are optimized for slower response times, smaller number of locations, etc. And so it is an exciting time for supply chain, but it's also a time where we need innovation. We need smart people like you to go work in these fields and to disrupt them. And so I would make the case that, what we are good at with supply chain design was kind of yesterday's customers. We were really good at kind of stationary demand, fixed networks, thinking about kind of Walmart got famous for doing this really, really efficiently. They capitalized on building efficiencies through economies of scale. So we were able to have these resources, use them really efficiently, but that's because we had much more static demands and we didn't have as complex of a customer situation. And so these are the supply chains that are definitely working, and they'll work in certain industries, but the trend really is towards more digital, but specifically more dynamic supply chains. So we need to think about is we have all of these things like fulfillment and planning and all of these things. We need to be able to be very agile. We need to update how we use our resources to meet different customer requests in a much more agile and dynamic way. The advantage to this hard problem, which is us demanding things really quickly, is we also have better tools. We have better data. We have better digital tools. We have a lot more insight and visibility into both the demand and the supply side. And so there is lots and lots of innovation happening in this space. There's lots of automation of decision making that's happening in the space, but it's definitely an exciting time, and there definitely is room for improvement to get us from where customers want us to be and what the companies can deliver. And so I would make the case to you is that we need innovation and change in this space. So, supply chains, not just in the US, but globally, are really stretched to their limit. And this is information I'm adopting from Benoit Montreuil at Georgia Tech, but he, talks about that there is really a limitation from three perspectives. If we think about people, you look at the social side of our supply chains, we are demanding a lot, right? So we are demanding this fast, reliable, affordable access to physical products, and it's really difficult. So that problem on like the customer side of people, it's tough. We want things that are really difficult to get in the current supply chain. So we need to innovate there. And then on the supply side, the worker side, a lot of the conditions in supply chains are less than ideal. And so we need to think about how can we ensure that we're making the work of the supply chain a better situation. We need to be human-centered in our designs of supply chains. So that's from kind of the people side. From the profit or economic side, if you look at how much GDP is taken up by logistics, in the US it's around 8.5%, but globally it's around 5 to 20%. And that's actually a huge amount of the GDP, which means we could be more efficient. And often if you see the costs, they are growing faster than world trade. And so there is need for innovation, there's need for change, there's need for improvement there. And then from the planet side, the environment, one of the heaviest greenhouse gas generators has to do with supply chains, and specifically the transportation side of supply chains. And it's a huge contributor to greenhouse gases, to the environment, and at a time when we need to do the opposite of that. We need to be doing less CO2 emissions, and supply chains are growing at that. And so just to further support that, this is a graph that I think is relatively interesting from 2020 from the EPA, and it shows different industries. And so if you look here, the transportation is the red line. So it is one of the few lines of these industries that is going up over time. Most of the other ones are stable or maybe even decreasing, right? And so the transportation is going up. Everything else is, either maintaining or potentially even going down. Like, electricity, for example, is getting more efficient. And so without widespread and concerted effort, transportation is set to overtake energy as the most carbon intensive sector by 2040. And if we look deeper into transportation, there are kind of two main categories of transportation: us driving around, passenger, and freight. And so both are projected to grow over time, but freight at a much, much higher rate. And so there is lots of opportunity here to think creatively and to get involved in thinking about how can we design our supply chains differently so that we don't have transportation polluting our environment to operate the supply chains we need. And so these are challenges. I don't have the answers to that, but I am excited to see so many talented people in this class. And maybe one of you or all of you will contribute to this problem. And so what I will say, just to kind of summarize, is that the gap between what we as customers want and what companies can deliver today is a gap, in my opinion. And so there is not this nice wood plank between those two things. And so what I would say, though, that is an opportunity for you. We need smart people that have analytical, complex thinking, computational tools to put that bridge there. I think the ingredients are there. We have a lot more data. We have a lot more computational power. We have a lot more smart people working in this area. We do need to continue building that bridge. And so, in my opinion, that's exciting. It's an exciting opportunity. And I think, again, just to kind of go back, it's an important problem to work on. So, COVID-19 really illustrated the importance of supply chains. As we're going through vaccines, supply chain and logistics is becoming a pain point in us getting vaccinated. And it illustrates how complex these systems are. One of the major complexity is an uncertainty. We don't know how much supply we will have. We don't know how much demand, where it will be. There is just so much uncertainty associated with that. So I think COVID-19 is a wonderful case study in the critical importance of supply chains for our health and well-being, our economy. But even before COVID-19, there is a ton of companies, when you think about kind of big names globally, that are really basically supply chain companies. When you think of Amazon or Alibaba, e-commerce, these are companies that are really, I would say, at the cutting edge of kind of the combining data science and analytics and optimization and OR to make decisions. And so that's exciting. There's also a lot of really interesting problems from urban logistics. So as more and more of the world's population lives in more urban areas, rethinking urban logistics and being innovative of how we shop, how we get our stuff, has evolved a lot recently, and I think it'll continue to evolve. And then if you think about, kind of more of the startups space, there are really a lot of supply chain and logistics companies, from Instacart, Uber. You could think about how, Uber Eats and things like that. And then there are also just some interesting kind of startups in terms of like Rent the Runway, Stitch Fix. They're really supply chain companies if you think about what they're delivering in terms of value. And so in my opinion, I'm totally biased, but in my opinion, there's all kinds of awesome opportunities. Lots of our alumni in our industrial and management engineering program go and work in some capacity in supply chains. That's because I think it's an impactful field. It's a challenging field. There are opportunity there, and it's exciting. Another reason I think it's exciting is it's a global thing. So just as a kind of simple example, if you think about something relatively simple, a coat, how many different countries does it take to make that coat? And you can see that there are different products from many, many different countries, from China to Thailand to Japan, Germany, all have to come together. They all have to bring products, bring talent to manufacture a coat. And if you think of something even more complicated than a coat, thinking of your smartphone or a vaccine or some sort of biomedical product, it gets even more complicated. And so, I think it's a cool field to go into because it's global. That does bring challenges, but it's an exciting, exciting thing. So my kind of message to you is that I would say this is a call to action, is that I would say supply chains need your talents. Whether that's in the public sector, the private sector, whether that's a company in the US or globally, supply chains need your talents. We need people that have the skills to think analytically and systematically about these problems. And so I hope through this class, one of the purposes of the class is to excite you and call to action to maybe pursue these in the future. So to support why I think there's a call to action, this is an article that is about 5 years old now, but I thought this was a really good quote. It says, how can this $1 trillion industry that's getting bigger every year just be hidden in plain sight? And the answer is easy. As long as it's working, it operates mainly behind the scenes. And so, it is something that is working behind the scenes, but we sometimes don't think about, right? And then, in the same article, it says analytics, scheduling, complex problem solving, project management. We need all of these, and they're very easily transferred from another business. So, the skills you're learning in industrial and management engineering are things that supply chain needs. I will also flip this around. If you have no desire to work in supply chains, the skills you'll learn in this class are applicable to other businesses as well. And so it says, we've been living with this problem for a while. The competition for talent is so fierce and we've had to get creative. And he says, we're looking for capable people. We're hiring. Tell your friends. Okay. So this was, in 2014, but this is still common today. There's lots and lots of opportunity to work in supply chains. And I would actually make the case that supply chains are becoming more and more critical. And this is because there's been a shift, specifically with e-commerce, that supply chains are now not just a cost center, but they're a revenue driver. They're a competitive advantage. So if you have ever looked at two websites and said, this one could get it to me faster than that one, so I'm going to buy it from that one, that means you made a decision based on a supply chain performance. And so this is Annette. She is the senior vice president at Penguin House Random House, the book company. I know Annette, she's an industrial engineer, but I also put this up here is that supply chains are these cool things. I really like reading. Reading is super cool. I think she has a cool job because she can combine reading with supply chains. And so if you have a passion for something, likely they have a supply chain. And so that's another reason to put this in. And so lots of industrial and systems engineers work in all kinds of different roles, and they're now getting elevated to the C-suite because, again, it's becoming a revenue driver, a competitive advantage, not just a cost center. Another example of this is, a supply chain analyst. And if you're interested, you can look at the more details in this link. But, I put this up here as, if you're really into, say, bicycling, you could go work for a company that does supply chain in this. And if the other thing I think is really great is if you read this, what it basically saying your job is forecasting and inventory management. Those are the two major topics we'll talk about in this class, in addition to others. And if you just think kind of more broadly across a lot of different companies, from Mercedes-Benz, Philips, Walgreens, Apple, Intel, Walmart, they all have industrial and systems engineering jobs. They all have supply chain and logistics roles. And if you look in here in the details, in Mercedes-Benz, it says forecasting techniques. That's something explicitly we will study in this class. We'll talk about networks. We'll talk about managing scheduling and, conducting cost production, making sure we can understand all of these things, right? So there's tons and tons of roles for jobs in this field, and we will study skills that can be applied to a wide range of jobs in supply chain. And so that's one reason you may want to take this class, is that you are really interested in supply chains as a career, maybe as a research area. So you want to go work in that field. That's fantastic. I think this class will satisfy a lot of those needs. You may say, you know what? I don't want to work in supply chains. I have zero desire to work in supply chains. That's fine. You still, in my opinion, will hopefully get a lot out of this class, because this class is really an application class that uses a bunch of tools that you have learned throughout your curriculum as an industrial and management engineer. It will use optimization, so OR methods. We will formulate integer programs, network optimization programs. We'll solve them, right? So we will use some of the skill sets you've learned in OR methods. We will also use R and forecasting, which is an application of statistics. Specifically, we'll use time series forecasting. And so that's an application of stat analysis, which you've taken. We will also do inventory theory, which is a direct application of probability. So going from MAU, modeling of analysis and uncertainty, we will take all of those different tools plus some more. We'll simulate some stuff. So discrete event simulation, we'll take all of those in and apply them to supply chain problems. And so if you never want to work in a supply chain, that's okay. I think you'll still get a lot out of this class because you will get better at using these tools that you've learned in other classes to really make decisions. And that is an extremely transferable skill that has potential beyond just the private sector. And so I'm a firm believer in the skills and the tools that you bring as an industrial and management engineer. Don't just think about applying them to the job you have. Think about how can you make an impact in the world. And just as one example, if you think of the US, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that live in what's called a food desert. And so food deserts are basically areas where there's not a grocery store close enough to walk. And so there's no, you don't have a car and you don't live walking distance from a supermarket. And so if you look in upstate New York where we are, there are actually quite a few food deserts there. And if you think about the implication of food deserts, this has an economic implication because you're now spending money at more expensive places like convenience stores, or you're having to pay to go get your transportation get there. But it also has a health impact. There's lots of studies that say if you're not accessing affordable, nutritious foods, you just aren't as healthy, and many, many other implications. And so if you think about, if we really want to solve this problem, we would need to bring in experts in many, many different fields. We wouldn't be the only one, but we could bring in things that we'll learn in this class to try to address and improve the access to affordable and nutritious food for people living in our country. So this is just an example that if you're interested in the skills and applying it to maybe a broader problem. So my last slide today in this video is I want to say that this course is an applied operations research, applied probability and statistics class. What is exciting to me is we are interested in starting with supply chain decision. So a lot of your other classes you've taken in this curriculum, you started with the method, right? So if you think about operations research methods, we started with linear programming or integer programming, and maybe we motivated it by some application, but it was mainly about the method. And in this class, we are actually saying, we have this question. Should I locate a facility here? How much inventory should I have? Etc. So we're starting with that supply chain decision. Then we're going to build a model to use that model to get insights and support our decisions. And so in this class, it's all about data-driven decision-making. And we're going to kind of follow this process, which I think is really powerful. It's about modeling complex problems. Can we model them and then support decision-making using data? So I'm excited about this class. I hope you are too. And we'll talk more in the next video about the details about this class.